You need to be able to know the people you work with, know what they're good at, know what they're not good at, and be able to make up for everyone's weaknesses. And as well as that, you need to be able to do that in a time-constrained fashion with pressure on you.
Today, we're joined by Bogdan Antonenko, a first-year student at the University of Virginia with a major in computer science. He has expanded his educational experience from lecture only to experiential learning and various competitions using the EdTech platform, the Virginia Cyber Range. Welcome and thank you for listening in. I'm Becky Fremel, and this is NextGen Cyber, the future of cybersecurity, a podcast of the U.S. Cyber Range, where we explore cutting edge trends, emerging technologies, and the future of cybersecurity careers, featuring thought leaders, researchers, and educators from across the field, and of course, in this case, a student who uses the Cyber Range. Bogdan, I would love for you to take a moment, if you would, just to introduce yourself.
Thanks again. As you pointed out, I'm a first year at the University of Virginia, and I'm excited about my experience so far, and I'm loving it. I would say I was first brought into the field by just things like the cyber range, and I'm excited to be on talking about something I love.
I love, love, love that you love it. That energy and that passion always makes such a difference, especially for our podcasts and our conversations. And for those of you who are listening, I just want to give you a little bit of background. The Virginia Cyber Range, which is what Bogdan is used to using, and the US Cyber Range of Virginia Tech are pretty much, they just are the same platform. They just have a little bit of a different business model for those who use the range around the United States and actually really globally versus those who use it at state-funded schools within the Commonwealth of Virginia. So if you hear a little bit of Virginia Cyber Range or US Cyber Range, just know we are talking about the same SaaS platform. That said, Bogdan, I would love to talk to you first just about what drew you into cybersecurity and a major in computer science in the first place.
Oh, actually, it was a teacher during middle school who brought me into kind of learning about this kind of field. Um, Learning about technology, it was usually just learning about Linux. And once I heard that, I thought I'd use it. And that was kind of the first experience realizing that something goes into whatever software I'm using. And really, I can change that, I can play with it, and it's not just some entity outside of myself. And playing around with that first hands-on experience is what really drew me in. And if it was in a classroom, if I was taught about it as something I need to learn, I don't know if I would have had the same love for it as I do now.
I was going to ask you that. What is your experience when you're talking about cybersecurity education? Even go back to your K through 12 years. What was your educational experience before you ever got to like touch the keyboard and dive into the cyber range itself?
It was somewhat lacking, I would say, but lots of what the classwork would entail is learning about the Microsoft Suite, Word, Excel, PowerPoint. And while those are useful, just the framework for how they were taught at the time I felt was just unexciting. But it was after talking with my teacher just on the side that I did learn more about Linux. And considering that I sometimes want to impress my teachers, I wanted to learn more about it. And at that point, I tried delving deeper into it and consistently using it. And really, the exercise that I first found was having software that one component I did not particularly like, which was a grid management, just how it looked. And that involved looking at the actual code for, at the time, I had no idea what I was looking at. Um, but I could see everything that built up what this was using. And like knowing anything you're not supposed to know, it does have a bit of energy, a bit of excitement with it, and kind
You,
of breaking that apart.
Sorry to interrupt. Quick question. Do you remember that first time when you talk about that excitement and that energy when you first logged in to the cyber range and what you saw? Did it kind of blow your mind? Like, I don't even know what to do. Were you like, let's just do the thing? Was the teacher maybe over your shoulder helping you? Like, can you remember that moment?
With the cyber range,
Yeah.
definitely.
Oh, cool.
I think the largest component was I played around with making something like the cyber range on my own, but it just doesn't really work. Um, you always want to work with something that just goes beyond just repeating and memorizing. Um, and working with kind of machines and a network on my computer, which I was interested in, it didn't really work quite as well. I could only work with a very finite amount of ideas. And having a cyber range that I can just play around with, potentially ruin, and then have it work out, that was exciting. Just to be able to do whatever I wanted without having to invest a month into getting ready to do something.
Are there any, I don't know, exercises, scenarios that really stood out to you or continue to stand out as being really valuable for you?
I think for me, I think working with individual like systems with firewalls and for some of the network sniffing exercises I've seen, um, some of those exercises you can't easily do in the complex fashion you can find on those kind of systems, just because you need a lot of places and a lot of systems working with that.
Gotcha. What about skills maybe like that you've developed that you're like, okay, had I not actually done this, if I just listened to the lecture in my classroom, but I didn't go into the competitions or ever log in to the cyber range, what would you have not gotten or on the positive spin, what have you developed because of that?
I think I probably would have missed the most important part of cybersecurity, and that's probably the why. Um, in a lot of classes and courses I've taken, in which they didn't use cyber range or anything, often they would be more limited to theory. And theory is very important for things like this, but often it doesn't get across the why aspect. And when I go into a class and I'm learning fundamentals like the TCP/IP protocol, I often see students memorizing like CIDR or IP classes or these fundamental concepts and aspects that students memorize and they don't realize why it's like that and why it might not work. And because they miss the why because they're doing what's best for them. What's best for a multiple choice or writing in an answer on a test. And writing in an answer or multiple choice is not what's going to be in the workplace, in the workforce, and in the trenches.
True story. Talk about too, if you recall any moment that it just clicked, like when that why moment happened and you're like, got it, this is why we're doing
There's quite a few.
it. Pick one, maybe or
Um,
two.
yeah, but for me, one experience would be running through the protocols, the procedures, which for my part, often like I would be more interested in just going off the bat and just working with the technology and figuring it out from there. And I wasn't really interested too much about the paperwork or the rules or whatever else someone else would be telling me because I would be setting up the system before. I knew what the problems entailed and I would work through it from there. With a system where someone hands it off to you, or if someone else hands you a problem that you don't know anything about, um, often you need to convey that information in a standard format. And with something that can be given, like you have a task, you have a business task, and you're given a system you know nothing about in a system you can't completely access. Now I start to see the use of having these protocols, having these procedures, having this paperwork that before I thought was just boring for the most part, slowed things down, and just really hammered in that importance of that.
I think confidence is such a big, big part just of life, and especially when you move into your first, job, when you're leaving your educational career and going into the next phase. And as a first year, obviously you have a few more years left, but you still have interns you need to show your confidence to and to get and to achieve as you go through each year till you graduate and get into the career world. Is there any like hands-on experience examples that you could have, or just overall, not even examples, but how it's impacted your confidence already?
I would I mean, one of the main problems I found was going into an application or just looking at the field is that a lot of the problems people face are complex and they're not as simple as just a simple like decision tree or just like a steps of procedures, even if that's what you have to follow. And really, the issue is that you're not used to those complex scenarios where you know you don't know half of what's going on and you're seeing people in these weird scenarios being able asking for things that seem impossible at first because you're given no information, you're given pretty much no context sometimes, and you have to figure it out all yourself with a bunch of theory in your head that's just clouding up there.
Right.
um, but I think reproducing those conditions under a controlled environment is really what made me used to the environment itself. Um, Being able to go into a competition or the classroom and be given just a network or a problem that I know nothing about, or just simple instructions, or maybe the instructions are unclear and they don't know, right? And that context, that's really important because it gamifies it, makes it interesting, and it just practices the conditions under which you're going to be in real life.
And I'm curious too, for you, I mean, all of us are in the digital age. I mean, if you are living and breathing on this earth today, you have a digital touch point multiple times a day. Have you found yourself, now that you have some of these concepts and have been in the cyber range, do you find that you've used any of it in situations outside of class, like in the real world, so to speak?
I definitely, in clubs I participate in, or even in my own personal security, sometimes you're not able to see as clearly as you would in a system or product like this. Um, and you can really see, for example, where my network goes to, how it operates under the hood. And for myself, if I'm using, for example, a VPN or some other technology, maybe I wouldn't be able to understand it if I didn't use a system that looks like a VPN or looks like a server and understand how it works. But now that I kind of understood by building it up myself, fixing one myself, or attacking one myself, I can understand how someone else would attack one, build one, set one up, fix it. Um, and that makes me more conscious of the servers I'm using. I know how people set it up, so I know where things can go wrong. And so if I'm using a technology, if I'm using something, or if I'm competing in something, I know where it can go wrong from experience in my class or in a competition.
What about when, and this kind of goes back to that confidence question, when it's time to apply for an intern, and maybe you have, tell us a little bit about it, and eventually a job. How do you think this experience will help you stand out?
I've applied to a few,
Mhm.
and I do see and I do hear from people that really the most important thing is just to know what you know, just know what you need to know, and we have practical experience for it. I think having this theory is very useful and critical, and being able to have a degree. But for experiences like cybersecurity, and IT in general, a lot of times people say you don't need a degree, and that the reason why is because you need hands-on experience. And for more complicated roles, maybe it's very useful to have a degree, but you
Mhm.
need to go hand in hand. Um, and so with a lot of experiences and things I look at, they need certain years of experience. It's very, very common. Um, and that's experience using the platform. And I don't think you have to wait to build you up your experience. You don't need an internship or job to build up your experience because you can engage in those activities before in the classroom by actually using the tools they use, emulating the environment they use, and finding the problems they use. Um, and I've applied to jobs that look for performance in CTFs, performance in networks like this, and competitions like this, because it really shows off a sense of passion and commitment
Mhm.
and something that's going beyond simply learning the theory and not learning how to apply it in a real job.
So CTF, I know a lot of people know about capture the flag, but I also know there are probably a few people, well, who maybe just don't even understand what capture the flag is, or they've heard a little bit about it, but they're not quite sure if they want to utilize it for their own class. Could you explain a little bit about capture the flag, what the process is like, and this is a 52-part question, you're welcome. But and also how it comes in your conversations when you are looking for those internships and those jobs. Like kind of give us that whole, like tie it all together, what capture the flag does for you.
I mean, capture the flag is mostly where you're given a set of challenges and you just fix them. That's generally what it is. You can divide it up. You're given a list of challenges, and it can range from a wide range of complexity. Sometimes they're segmented little parts where you're given a small puzzle, and sometimes it's not even something specifically to cybersecurity, and it's just general thinking, general critical thinking, which I think is useful for all categories no matter if you're cybersecurity or not, just knowing how to think about certain ideas. And then it can go to more complex, stepping up with puzzles that are linked together or even entire systems, entire programs that you need to work out. And really, I think it introduces a lot of aspects you need. Um, it in a lot of cases, it introduces teamwork and collaboration, which I think is one of the largest components of cybersecurity. When you're given a large field to work with, when you're given a large problem to work with, you need to be able to know who's the best at what they do, and split up those roles. And it's nice to know everything, but really it's not what's going to be like in real life. And when you're given a timeline, like you are in capture the flag competitions, you need to be able to give out those challenges to who excel in it and be able to work as a team and communicate to solve a problem the best way possible.
It seems like if you are highlighting what you did to a potential employer, whether it was, a career job or an internship for the summer, quarter, semester, whatever, that I didn't even think about that until you just said it. But that would be a big part of what you want to highlight, not just like, hey, I know how to do XYZ, but there's a lot of necessary. In fact, I've heard some people call them power skills. I call them necessary skills. They used to be called soft skills, but we kicked that one to the curb. But it's so important to talk about those skills as well. And I guess listening to you talk about that just now made me realize it's not just about the skill set you're learning and saying, hey, I've got hands-on experience with this platform, but that you also are learning how to lead, collaborate, play, and work well on a team, so to speak. Talk a little bit about that and how important that has been, again, opposed to just sitting there and listening to a lecture.
Yeah. Well, again, it's sometimes you get very complex problems with these things. And when you're given a small problem, when you're given two puzzles, it might be very easy to say, I'll do this part, you do this part. And that's often how school projects go. Just I'll do half, you do half.
Yeah.
And it doesn't matter who does what or whatever, because it's just generally available. But when you're working with something more complex, when you're working with complex systems, um, that really you need an expert in sometimes. It's not as easy to say, I'll do half, you do half. You need to be able to know the people you work with, know what they're good at, know what they're not good at, and be able to make up for everyone's weaknesses. And as well as that, you need to be able to do that in a time constrained fashion with pressure on you. Um, and working with a complex system, you might, for one problem, you might bring in someone who's an expert at this, find that that problem leads to another problem, and you have to bring in someone completely different. And that requires coordination. And that requires coordination among sometimes two people, sometimes eight people, depends on the team. And with a classroom, it really depends on the size you have. Sometimes I'd be interested to work with like classes with 30 people or something. To work with these complex problems, you really need to structure your team around, structure your communication around, uh, work with something that's it's not an easy division of labor. It's not an easy set of communications you need. Something you really need to build up, practice, and repeat over and over so that you're ready for when an emergency happens or you really don't have the time to talk it all out like slowly.
During those collaborative moments when you're working as a team, has anything ever popped in your mind, or does it help to see how other students utilize the range? So you're like, oh, I never thought about doing it that way, or "Oh, that's an interesting concept or perspective on what we're working on."
In terms of the platform itself, or just the problems we see.
Honestly, kind of both. I mean, I don't know how straightforward you have found it to be that like, okay, if I had this problem in front of me, the path is always X, Y, and then Z. And so if Becky came in, the path is going to be X, Y, and Z. Or do they come in and say, oh, no, no, you can make it X, A, B, C, and then Z? Like, does it allow you that creativity, or is it usually pretty cut and dry, like this is what we need?
I think it's a bit of a mix of both. Not that to say there isn't creativity, but I think you have a wide range of tools at your disposal with these sort of problems. And often you don't have the time to go through it all and be able to say, I'm an expert in everything this problem entails, and I will do it just with my mind. Because the main point of I think cybersecurity is utilizing everything you have to its full extent. Um, and often that involves going through a procedure to test things out, but it requires knowing that entire tool set and using it sometimes that are not intuitive or usual. Um, you might have a list of tools that are just a list of tools, but you really need to be able to break up how it's used. Often, one experience I've had is that I've made a program. I have in the past made a program to fix a problem, go through an audio file, and find out what's hidden in the audio file. And I think, wow, I did that. Awesome. And then from that audio file, I'll receive another piece of data, and it's too obscure, too lacking of context and information for me to not use creativity. I could run through 500 tools, 500 ideas, every single one, but that's going to take years if I do it without any thinking on my part. And in that case, I actually had a teammate come over, look at the problem at hand, and said, "Oh, I know what that is instantly," because that's what they specialize in, and they know what tool to use for that. And if I hadn't had a diverse perspective on this, maybe I probably wouldn't have gotten that answer. And if I did, it would have been a lot longer.
Gotcha. So talk about cybersecurity education and all the things that you just talked about, how you think it's going to move cybersecurity education into the future, and the importance of having a tool like this as you move through college.
I think systems like this, systems that gamify and give more complex scenarios, are critical, absolutely critical for a field like this, any field that evolves as quickly as it does. Um, I mean, in any field, often you see these competitions or gamifications that provide this feedback because really what is very important is for students to be able to get feedback on how they do and be able to improve quickly. Because learning theory, um, students are left on their own. If you present a lecture and all the students are given a set of bullet points, you're not sure how well they're doing. They might memorize it, they might really look into it. Um, but really, it's really hard to engage without a hands-on activity to put that, like, make that more concrete, stick in the mind, and understand why it functions the way it is. And just because all the technologies we learn today are built on top of other technologies, and one day they might be gone, maybe they're different, maybe they're just completely out of whack, they're just w way different. And going in a theory perspective and not understanding how it's made up is not going to work. Working with technologies that I mean, it's easy to say that coursework often is hard to develop, and that's why it takes often months or years to develop a program, to develop a degree. And for things like cybersecurity, that's often too slow. Working with new threats that change day to day, it's not going to work to learn the theory and then have that um, kind of thrown out for one technology. Really, it's important to understand the fundamentals of what's being learned and to practice that change. Because working with these technologies that change, something that changes and gives the system, the process is more important than the what you're working with.
So here's a question for you in regards to both professors and administrators, as well as students who haven't used the range. And I kind of did this two-part question because professors and administrators are the ones who'll be making the decisions, like, yes, let's implement this platform. And then you're going to have students who might say, oh gosh, they implemented this platform and I'm not ready to use it. It makes me nervous. You might even have a professor who doesn't want to implement it because they don't know how to use it. What would you say to any of those folks, the professors to the students, when they're thinking about implementing this type of platform in their education?
I think it is a difficult problem in a lot of in certain capacities, but I think working with kind of a scaling problem set, working with something that's dynamic like this, you really need to scale the complexity, and often that involves teaching the theory first. The theory first is often you can't just throw someone into the water and not teach them how to swim. Um, but theory is still just as important. Um, and I think the main part of it is having the theory, having the explanation, uh, preceding or preceding before and maybe after that exercise, um, to give students a breakdown of what they're getting into, kind of to prepare them for an experience like that. And then pairing that up with the actual experience of working with the theory they just learned, um, working with something that at first builds up slowly by slowly working on concepts, going from simple command line to hopefully as complex as it can be. That's the hope. Um, and often I would say being able to give students a way to exercise beyond um, go and excel. I think having students able to kind of practice on their own, giving them the resources to do that, giving them a full kind of network, even if you don't utilize it sometimes, might be a useful experience for the students who want to explore and break down the system, because sometimes students will want to look more closely at what they're using and look more beyond just the basics of what they're practicing.
And any thoughts as we wrap up? I'd love to leave it with, hey, this isn't just about, it is everything about education. And in the same breath, it's not just about education because when you graduate, career-ready students, the entire industry benefits. And right now, there is something like 25, 30%, a third of cybersecurity jobs are being left unfilled. Um, any kind of parting thoughts in that realm of, hey, professors, get your students career ready, or hey, companies and hiring agencies out there, you've got people coming right out of college that are ready to go.
I think a large part of it is in terms of getting people ready for the workforce and seeing that people are getting ready for the workforce, uh, being able to and having students like throw themselves into the pond, I would say. I think a lot of times students are given uh, too much of a path, if even that. It's often easy to give a student a very concrete path and a very linear focus and a very linear progression. But often it requires engagement from the student and a bit of critical thinking on their part. Uh, and that involves providing as much complexity in everything as possible, working with other students, working with all types of problems outside of cybersecurity, possibly. Really, what is amazing with systems like this is I see in some of my classes and some of the competitions is working with domains outside of cybersecurity that involves you being given a task by someone who's focusing on something completely different, focusing on reducing costs, focusing on monetization, or something they heard about in the news, some business executive. And sometimes people aren't able to translate those problems into the realm of cybersecurity. And it's hard to do in a class, often because you're not learning business, you're not learning something else, you're focused on this. And the main focus, a large focus, I think, would be to integrate all these problems together, to throw as much as a student as they can innovate with. And this involves I mean, supporting creativity with students, giving students the leeway to uh, kind of break things, kind of work outside a very neatly defined scope, and being able to contribute to the class that they participate in. Um, Kind of working with relevant components. So I think one great thing would be to have businesses work more closely with these systems like this, being able to have examples of the kind of systems they work with. And that would, I think, facilitate even greater like innovation and ability for students to adapt to the workforce requirements. And I think we have seen a lot of that. I think the cyber range and all these in initiatives are driven by that need. And I think that's great.
I love it. I love it. Bogdan, thank you so much. I really appreciate you taking the time to talk to us today.
Thank you. It was great being on.
Awesome. Very cool. And keep it up. You've got, I know, a couple years still ahead of you in college. We got your internships. Career world is ready for you when you are ready to graduate. I know it. Again, we've been talking to Bogdan Antonenko, a student at the University of Virginia, majoring in computer science. And thank you to our listeners for joining us for Next Gen Cyber, the future of cybersecurity, a podcast of the U.S. Cyber Range.